Okay, welcome everyone to this episode of the Sync Your Life podcast. I am joined by my friend Mindy Irish. This is her second appearance on the show. I knew that the first time I had her on, I was going to have her back because we talked all things fitness and women's health on the previous podcast. And we didn't even touch on her particular journey with Hashimoto's. So I wanted to have her back on because Hashimoto's is something that I keep hearing more and more about. I have women in my Sync Digital course who, once they start to get the right testing and they start to really navigate themselves down this more functional journey of health, they're starting to get diagnoses like thyroid diseases and Hashimoto's. So knowing that Mindy is, an NPC bodybuilding competitor, and she's a personal trainer, and she's obviously putting fitness and health as a priority in her life, but yet also dealing with Hashimoto's, made me want to have her back on the show because I want her to be speaking to the woman out there who maybe has recently gotten this diagnosis, who's thinking they can't be healthy or they can't lose the weight or they can't do something because of this disease. She's somebody who's been living with it and living well. She manages it well. So we're going to be talking today just about her story. We're going to be talking about everything having to do with Hashimoto's and the thyroid as it pertains to Mindy. So the first thing I want to say is, for anyone listening who's like, what's Hashimoto's? This is something I've never heard of before. I want to kick it off by just saying, it is basically a situation where your body is producing antibodies that attack your thyroid. So it's essentially attacking itself. And the other thing that I want to call attention to, and we will get to as we talk in the podcast, is that when I did some research, I found that according to Cleveland Clinic, 5 in 100 people have Hashimoto's. So 5% of people are diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And so we're going to talk more about testing and what modern medicine typically tests for versus functional medicine and what they test for. But I want to start things off with just welcoming Mindy back to the show and having her give us just a brief synopsis of who she is in case listeners did not listen to the first episode with her. Mindy, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, it's great to be here, and I'm honored at the ask to come back. I live in Indiana with my family. I've been married to my husband, Dan, for 23 years. I have 4 children, ages 12 to almost 19. And I am a personal trainer and online fitness coach, and I work with women local to me and online as well. So I'm just basically went from pain to purpose in my life and walked through some years of awesome health and then some years of altering health and didn't really know what was happening. And long story short, eventually was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. So I've spent the last 22 years, that was in 2000, spent the last 22 years learning my body and learning what works for me, learning more about the autoimmune disease, and then just working the system, meaning working how, on a daily basis, investing in my health proactively.
Yes. And so the first thing that I want to say, to everyone listening is nothing about what we talk about today having to do with Hashimoto's should be construed as medical advice. You should always be working with your doctor and asking your doctor for, guidance when it comes to supplementation and testing and all that sort of stuff. But I do want to make sure that we touch on the details of Mindy's journey. So Mindy, can you tell us, when this all started for you, what were you experiencing from a symptom perspective before you got the diagnosis?
Okay, so the diagnosis actually happened in my mid-20s, but that's not actually when issues arose. And when you get to learn about this autoimmune disease or others, you get to know that it can be decades in the making. And so what often starts and triggers that can be lifestyle, can be stressors, grief, just long-term emotional issues, and lots of environmental factors. When I look back from my mid-20s at my diagnosis to what I did leading up to that, say 10 years, 12 years prior, I was a swimmer. I was in chlorine. I was a competitive swimmer for 9 years. I was in a lot of chlorine. Now I know how that impacts my body because I absorbed that. Went off to college started getting into late nights, stress. I'm a type A perfectionist, drinking, and all of a sudden my body, I wasn't diagnosed at the time, my body was like not having it. Ended up with a major candida overgrowth that shut down my female cycle. The physicians couldn't tell my mom and me why. They just wanted to put me on birth control. My mom is smart enough at the time, and this was when I was 20 years old, so we're talking 27 years ago, for her to say, no, I want you to get to root cause. So my mom took me to a naturopath, and he did a gut bacteria test, and he was like, you have candida overgrowth. He took me off of the traditional American diet, which is basically how I eat now, and he put me on plants and proteins, and I lost 15 pounds. He cleaned out my gut, and I got my period. Well, otherwise, the physician, the OB, wanted to put me on birth control, and we knew that wasn't going to solve the problem. But that was a short-term solution because I didn't hold with the nutrition. I didn't stick, start more stress, change colleges, eventually got married, got a new job. We moved to California. At mid-20s, my body just started gaining weight, and I was stressed out. I had a classroom full, working with children with special needs, all of the things, marriage, house, move, new job. So trigger to where my body said no more. And finally got in line with the right endocrinologist who tested my thyroid antibodies, because we were like, is it thyroid? She tested my thyroid antibodies, and they were through the roof. And my TSH was through the roof. I couldn't sleep. I was fidgety. I had major ADHD. And as someone like myself who had things kind of lined up with their ducks in a row all through high school and early college, to be going through that, you were like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get my act together? So it was a relief to find those answers. That said, I still didn't really internalize the nutritional piece. That was my late 20s. I needed fertility help to get pregnant with my first kiddo. And then subsequent pregnancies, I didn't need fertility help, but I do know it was all rooted in the thyroid. And again, I wasn't working out then. I wasn't eating well. I was very sugar addicted. I was medicated through the endocrinologist during my pregnancies. She took my blood work once a month, and that was basically the extent of it. I thought that was managing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I got through, we're now talking into the 2009. By that point, I was very overweight, obese, sugar addicted, and living off of processed foods, high stress, high grain and high dairy diet. And then I had 4 kids, 6 and under. So you're talking a lot of stress physically, environmentally, and then, emotionally, because again, that type A was trying to kick in and keep all the balls in the air and not let anything fall.
Mm-hmm.
So then is when I switched gears eventually to where I am now from a lifestyle perspective.
Yeah. And I do want to dive into that, but I also want to stop you right there, because I think there's a couple of things I want to touch on. One is, can we just talk about the overprescribedness of the birth control pill briefly? Because I have an episode on this, a solo round, and a blog article on this that I can link to as well. But if you guys knew how many times I hear this, whether it's someone dealing with a thyroid condition or PCOS or endometriosis or whatever, irregular cycles, and it's usually, unfortunately, the first line of defense for a lot of OBGYNs is to prescribe the birth control pill, which, as we know, is really just a Band-Aid to cover up the symptoms and not at all a root cause. So props to your mom for knowing, we know what we know, right? We can't unlearn what we know now. And she sounds like she knew enough to know that you had to get to the root cause of what was going on. You talked about so many things that I want to circle back to through this show. One being candida, which we'll come back to, and the gut and the connection with the gut when it comes to this. But I want to ask you, so you talked briefly about testing, and I want to make sure that we touch on that for people, because I think a lot of people will say, I actually just spoke with a woman yesterday who was telling me that she said, well, I had my last child at the age of 37. And she said, after my last child, I started to feel really off. And she started to explain some symptoms to me. And then she said, I've told my OBGYN and I've told my general practitioner, and all they ever do is run a test on my thyroid, and it's normal. And so then we just move on and they tell me that I'm fine. And so long story short, the only thing that was being tested for her was her TSH. And I see this so often with women that's the only thing being checked. There's no T3, T4, there's nothing else. So I want to ask you, what do you know about this? And I'm assuming you now have regular checks on these things. But what's your experience with testing?
So the early days, I believe we were just testing TSH. And then thankfully, when I got into the endocrinologist, she did a thyroid panel. And that's when the antibodies came in. And that's what told her that it was autoimmune. It wasn't just a slow and failing thyroid, hypothyroid. It was autoimmune Hashimoto's, where my thyroid was so damaged that, my body was starting to basically attack within itself. So we do check those annually. We do the profile. I'm still learning more about that. My levels are optimal, and I will go into that and tell you why. There's some levels of it that aren't as optimal, probably because I do a little too much caffeine. But there's something I'm maybe not quite ready to give up yet. But you have to pick and choose, if you go a lot in this by how you feel and how you function, and how you're thinking, and not always by, I'm going to strive for that perfect number on a piece of paper. So.
Right. Absolutely. I'm the same way. My doctors have mentioned, how much caffeine do you consume? And I tell them, and I've said this on the podcast before, that for me, it's a matter of the type of coffee that I drink. If I were to drink Folgers every day, I would get brain fog and all sorts of like jitters, but I stick to clean mycotoxin free coffee beans. So I use either Bulletproof or Life Boost coffee. I do half decaf. And it's funny because my doctor and I joke about this a lot. And I tell her that, I'm like, if you were to look at like my food diary and my exercise patterns and my sleep, like, let me have these 2 cups of half decaf coffee a day. Like, really, like, I don't drink alcohol. I don't, like, please just let me have these 2 things. So I totally understand, like, pick your poison, and if it's coffee, so be it. I did pull up sort of a list because I wanted to see, obviously here's the thing about hormones, regardless of whether it's thyroid or not, we have what I call the 4-legged hormone chair. So oftentimes, women will see irregular cycles. That doesn't necessarily mean that sex hormones are off. Could be something to do with the thyroid, as you were saying, with your cycles. Everything works together, right? And so a lot of times, there's one leg of the chair that's the weakest, but that doesn't mean that the whole chair doesn't wobble. And so a lot of times when we look at symptoms and signs of hormonal imbalances, or in this case, looking at signs and symptoms of Hashimoto's, they can be a lot of the same signs and symptoms as you would see with other things like low progesterone or other things as well. And so I was looking at this, and there's a really extensive list of what can be included when it comes to symptoms for Hashimoto's. Fatigue being one, of course, weight gain, which you mentioned, headaches, migraines, thinning hair and nails, a constant feeling of cold or an intolerance of heat, irregular periods, brain fog, loss of muscle strength and tone. Like, there's really a whole list of stuff. But I just have this to say, that if you're listening to this and you're thinking, my check engine light's been flashing for a while, or like this person I just told the story of, who's been feeling off since her last child. If your doctor is only doing a serum test on your TSH or your basic hormone levels, it's time that you dig a little bit deeper with further testing. And it's time that you perhaps work with a functional medicine doctor. So I'm assuming that as you have sort of evolved over time, that, functional medicine is now part of your repertoire, and you've been able to use that and the testing, but also the lifestyle habits to really create a regimen for you that works. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about, obviously you're doing something right. So can you tell us a little bit more about your lifestyle now?
Okay. So am very passionate about this because I believe that it offers hope to everyone in the fact that we don't have to be predetermined by what a lot of people say, air quotes, my genetics. So once I learned about the power of epigenetics, which means that I can have an impact based on how I live, think, what I eat, who I surround myself with, those type of variables, to name a few, my sleep, everything can impact how my body responds. So it's almost like it's so empowering because what I choose to do and think on a daily basis can have an impact on my health. And that's where I'm seeing that. Yes, we might have some factors that really we cannot overcome, but it's also empowering to know that we don't have to wave the white flag, that there are a lot of things that we can do personally on a daily basis, but we have to keep doing them. And so in late 2009, I decided to finally, we knew we were done with children, finally lose the weight. And I used Weight Watchers at the time. Got a lot of weight off in the first couple of years, got a lot of progress, was really happy with that. It wasn't until about 2012 and 13 when I started factoring in routine weight training, started seeing a big change in not only how I felt and slept and performed, but also how I looked. So weight training was that variable that I put in, and I've been weight training now consistently 4 to 5 days a week for 10 solid years. I am a personal trainer, but I became a personal trainer because of what it did to me early on. As I navigated through that and I started getting all of the results, that is when I learned how critical nutrition is. And with Hashimoto's, what I like to tell people is we have a very thin filter that everything runs through. So we're very sensitive. We're very sensitive to our rhythms and our daily schedule. We're sensitive to our devices, the EMF. We're sensitive to sleep patterns. And we have to understand that we talk about the word stress. We often just attribute that to, work stress, or we attribute it to a due date of a project, and that's stressful. Stress comes in on our nutrition, and then we are living through chemical stress internally that is compounded by what's happening out in our environment. With someone with Hashimoto's, that is fundamental. And we have to realize what I've come to understand, that because I was no longer thinking through the lens of like a victim mentality, that I was going to be living under this umbrella term of Hashimoto's the rest of my life and be told that I was going to be out of shape and low energy and just miserable. Once I learned that nutrition was going to have such an impact on me, I got extremely territorial with what I put on my plate, because that was empowering to me. So through time, and it wasn't overnight, through time, I've evolved to what I call the one ingredient lifestyle. People will start to want to know, is it keto? Is it paleo? Is it low carb, high carb, carnivore? I don't align with any of that. It's of the earth. It's real foods, it's plants and proteins, and it's animal protein and plants that grow and die. Not anything. There is a difference between plant products. So not, fake plant chemically made foods. This is real deal, things that you would buy in the produce section or things that you will grow in your garden. Lots of color. And that is what has truly changed my body, my sleep, my performance, my mental health, everything. So I've had to learn what works for my system, not only from a quantity amount, but also from a quality amount. And that often flies in the face of the standard American diet.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I love the way you just said that. It's all about more quality food, whole foods, right, from the earth. I love that you said that. But it's interesting because it's like, how many diets exist out there that are like, well, you can still have the processed food, but let's do this. And there's so many different things. It's like, and I love what you said too about like categorizing it. I get the same questions. People are like, are you paleo? Are you grain free? Are you this? Are you vegan? And I'm like, I just eat the food that God made. Like, and that's how I teach my children. I teach my children that the food we eat are classified into proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. I teach them the scientific terms because I want them to know that food is fuel. And that's the way I talk about it. That's the way I feel about it. I obviously have come a long way. I mean, a dozen years ago, I was the hamburger helper queen. So, and it's a journey. And I've said this before on different episodes. It's a journey, right? And for someone to go from, like I said, hamburger helper to, extreme, I'll call it rainbow plate of peppers and ground turkey and whatever else, and black beans and whole foods, like might be a drastic change, but taking the right next step on that journey of making sure that you're limiting processed foods and ultimately essentially removing processed foods and including more whole foods in your diet is so, so key. Now, I want to make the connection here for people listening. That, when we talk about autoimmune and we talk about Hashimoto's, we think about the immune system and what the immune system is spending its energy fighting. And so if the immune system of your body is dealing with something like Hashimoto's, in Mindy's case, it's essentially attacking itself. So it sees a threat and it's attacking itself. So in that case, the body is already in a state of inflammation. And so the gut is what I'm specifically referring to, the gut microbiome. And so if we're feeding the gut microbiome refined sugars and processed foods, then our gut is not, it's like an overload of the system. It's like this additional stress that, that's causing the body to become even more inflamed. So it's not serving you. And so I just wanted to say that because, this is sort of a new topic for me. I've been working a lot with Dr. Laura Brown, who's the author of Beyond Digestion. She's sort of a gut health queen, and she's been teaching me so much as it pertains to what foods are inflammatory to people. And of course, it's unique to each person. But I do know specifically that there's been strong correlation and connection to foods like gluten and dairy and people who suffer from Hashimoto's. Those are very highly inflammatory foods. So tell me, are they part of your diet? And if so, in what ways?
So they were, but they are not now. Let me go ahead and dive into that. I grew up on a grain and dairy diet. We had cereal for breakfast. We had gallons of milk in the house. And I constantly had that phlegm in my throat. And I still remember eating, all the cereals back in the day. Every meal had some sort of grain, meaning wheat, to it. As I've gotten to navigate through this, I just learned I felt so much better, like I said, on the plants and proteins. I did not understand until the last, really, I would say 4 years, how much of an impact gluten / wheat / glyphosate sprayed on those products is impacting the Hashimoto's body. I decided, I'd heard so much talk about it, and in 2016, I thought I'm just going to go off of wheat. And I did that for 2 years. I was consistent. I looked great. I felt great. But then I got to a point where I was like, I'm kind of tired of passing up the pancakes. I'm tired of not indulging with the family. I'm tired of just being different. So 2018 to late 2021, I put wheat back in my diet. And as a competitive bodybuilder, I will be honest with you, I couldn't get as lean as I had before. And I was like, what's going on? I'm doing all the things. So finally, and I'm going to give credit because I believe in giving credit where credit is due, Dr. Amy Horniman, and I found her on Instagram. I started listening to her podcast. So if you have thyroid issues or Hashimoto's, I suggest listening to her podcast. It was late fall 2021, so just last fall, and she basically had a podcast and said, hear me now, if you have Hashimoto's, you cannot do gluten. You cannot do gluten. I mean, she kept repeating herself, and I just knew she's speaking to me. I've done this before. I knew I had to go back off of it. I took it out of my diet, and lo and behold, I leaned out. I placed well at my show. It was kind of that missing component. Not only that, had my blood work done. Let's see, 6 months later, my antibodies were the lowest they'd ever been. My TSH was in a great spot. My C-reactive protein was in a great spot. My testosterone had increased. So, a lot of variables had made positive progress because I didn't have the gluten. Not only that, the compound effect of it isn't just like, oh, one meal. It's over time. You have to be consistent. Like, make a decision, stay off. Because in the times that I might throw a bite back in, you're just restarting the issues.
The process.
6 months to get it out of your body. So I am now grain free. I've taken out the oats. I've taken out corn. I don't do rice. And then I don't do the wheat. I will do an occasional potato, and I'll do an occasional dairy, but I pay for it. My body just gets tired. I'm more prone to getting sick. I feel sludgy, my readiness score from my Oura ring will drop. So I just have to be, really consistent with that. But I tend to do a little better on, we don't drink milk, and if I do want a random treat, I'll have a little bit of ice cream here and there, but definitely the grains I have to keep out.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask because one of my resources that I refer to often is Rupa Health, and I love the testing that they're coming out with now that is really hard to beat. But I was reading about this before our call, and they were talking about how the microbiome is really, obviously, we talk about it in my course as the foundation to the four-legged chair, right? Like your gut microbiome is where your endocrine system sits. And so if your gut is unhealthy, or if there's some form of dysbiosis, then that inflammation, as I mentioned before, is not going to help you. It's going to actually hurt you. And gluten has been closely connected. When I was doing a little bit of research, I saw so many different studies on the connection to gluten and Hashimoto's and the worsening over time of symptoms, as opposed to the removal of it completely. So if you're listening to this and Hashimoto's is something that you've been diagnosed with, seriously consider removing all forms of gluten from your diet. You said that you had, in the very beginning of your journey, you had sort of this like candida overgrowth. Is that something did they put you on some sort of, was there a detox there, or was it just mostly just shifting your lifestyle and your nutrition?
So that was when I was 20 years old, and that came from just eating a very high grain and dairy diet, college dorm food, staying up late, and introducing alcohol. And that just was, on a side note, I don't drink alcohol now. I can't. It's just physically too hard for my body. So back then, it was just such a hardship on my system. And they used some antifungals at the time, and then nutritional therapy, which would be taking me off of grains, just primarily from getting in. Even he took me off of fruit, so the fructose was an issue. I remember as a 20-year-old, I was like, I can't eat pretzels. I love pretzels. And I at the time, saying that to a young person when everyone else around you was eating anything and everything they wanted, and then I couldn't. That was very hard. As an adult, it's much easier because you can find those people that are like-minded, or you're just a little more confident in your lifestyle and decisions. But back then, that was a big deal. So, he gave me a list of condiments to avoid that had vinegars in them. He gave me, all the grains. And that was a pretty much a flipping the switch overnight change. And I can't remember, I'm sure I must have executed it pretty darn well because it left my system, but I didn't stick with it. So, that propensity for it to return is high. And I also later developed a sugar addiction. I don't have it now, but those things are all related. you know?
Yeah. 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 We could have our own episode on sugar by itself, I'm sure.
Yeah, let's do that.
One, let's do it. One thing that I have, this is all interesting how this podcast in general has really, I told my husband last night, it's been teaching me so much at the right time. And recently I interviewed Dr. Michelle Jorgensen, who is a functional dentist. And we have an episode that I can link to in the show notes about oral health as root cause. And I'll be honest, it's really gotten my brain spinning on perhaps my root causes, because it's never made sense to me why I have, you know, headaches triggered by a certain hormone imbalance. And to me, it's never felt like the true answer. And of course, I was talking to someone else recently and they were like, you can keep peeling back the onion, but you may never get to the core of the onion, right? You may never get to the root. And we were talking about it. And I said, well, maybe that's the point. Like, maybe the point is that, like I was just, I'm a spiritual person. And I was just listening to our minister last weekend talking about purpose. And I think you said at the very beginning of this, like, your pain turned into your purpose. And I can say the same thing for myself. And that's why I love having people like you on here, because, not only have you sort of overcome something, but it's not like you've overcome and there's an after picture, right? Like, it's like you're still on the journey of living this, and you're still on the journey of sharing and trying to empower other people. And I feel like I'm in the same boat. But on the note of peeling back the onion and looking for root cause, having Dr. Jorgensen on the show to talk about oral health really got my wheels spinning as far as how many years I've been using fluoride toothpaste, not knowing that there was some sort of, blocking of thyroid that could be happening from just using that type of toothpaste, and thinking about the root. I have had one root canal, and I've had wisdom teeth dry sockets, and I've had sort of an oral history. And so hearing her talk about these different things that she finds in her patients has not only made my mouth hurt every time I think about it, but it also has made me think that, we think about how many people are out there living with a thyroid disease of some sort, how much of oral health could be contributing to that. So I want to ask you, if you're willing to share. I know you said you listened to that episode of the podcast, but have you taken different, approaches in your oral health when it comes to toothpaste and hygiene and stuff like that? Or what did you think when you heard that episode?
It was wonderful. And I'm not currently with a functional dentist, but I do want to get there. So I really appreciated that episode. We don't do fluoride. I deny fluoride for myself and my children at the dentist, and they look at me sideways because that's just what everybody does. So we don't do that. We have a Berkey water filter that we pour our city tap water through to get, all the contaminants out ideally. And we use a non-fluoride toothpaste. I do have mercury fillings in my mouth because I'm a child of the 70s. I've had my wisdom teeth removed. I will say that, my dentist has told me I have a very clean mouth. And I now attribute that to my nutrition. So it's all tied together. Your gut health is going to start in your mouth, and the health of your mouth is going to be tied to the gut health. So it's not
Absolutely.
That, when we sit and look at all the specialists that we have in our community medically, we fail to realize that the body is one whole, and that, we're just talking about gut, we're talking about dental. It's all related.
Yep.
And so, flossing is a big deal. But yes, back from when I was a child, I had the fillings, and now I can't say that any of that is pointed to my Hashimoto's. I believe
Right.
it's rooted in just some lifestyle early on, and nutrition, and a little family propensity for it, that all the right factors lined up that triggered it. But like I said, I have the fillings, the mercury fillings. You never know what was that final piece to plug in to tip the body. And because developed, it's not something you wake up with. It's developed much like, lots of other diseases developed over decades. It's all about that drip and that bucket compound effect slowly over time.
Right.
So it isn't that there's any one variable that's to blame or root cause, it's variables and that
Yeah.
collect over time, which is why I'm reminded that the lifestyle to now stay ahead of it, because I often tell people I'm living with Hashimoto's and I live ahead of my symptoms. The lifestyle is a daily investment. It's something I have to choose to do. It isn't just like I have a checklist and I go around and I get all my fillings out and I do this, that, and the other, and I'm done. This is something that I'm going to reset my patterns and have done so for the rest of my life, primarily rooted in my mindset. That's really where it began.
Yes. And that leads us perfectly into what my next question was going to be, which is, I'd love for you to give us, in as much detail as you're willing to give, what your daily routine looks like. I follow you on social media, and so I know I see you doing earthing. I see you doing like farmers walks in your driveway. I see you exercising. I see what's on your plate. So I have an idea, but I would love to know, when do you wake up? What is the first thing you do out of bed in the morning? Like, take us through your day.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start this off by saying that I'm very systematic. I love structure. I love organization. I'm firstborn type A, and rhythm and patterns fill my tank. So those things, developing those are not hard for me. They are comforting to me. So the pattern that I've most recently developed is as a personal trainer, I do train people out of my home. And I say that because they come in maybe at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. in the morning. And that means I need to get my self-care going ahead of that. I feel best getting up ahead of them and doing some of my self-care routine, training clients, and then picking back up. So don't let this scare you, but I get up at 4 a.m. On a good night, I go to bed at 9. That's a good night, but with 4 kids, it's late. With the sun up later, it's harder to get to bed, so it might be 10. I will preface this by saying I need about 7 hours of sleep. Ideally, I'm probably getting closer to 6. So it's not uncommon to find me taking a little nap later in the day. So, okay, keep that in mind. I get up at 4. I like that quiet hour. I do my supplements, my coffee, my water filled, and I go out front and I sit barefoot in the calm and the quiet and kind of just get my day set up just for about, 10 minutes or so. I would sit there longer if I could. I do my devotion. I just notice what I notice. I listen to the birds waking up. It's dark out. It's quiet. I do cardio in my gym in my house. So I do daily walking. A lot of people will say, what kind of cardio should someone with Hashimoto's do? I will tell you, having been a former runner, a former swimmer, the best thing that I can suggest that someone do is walking. I walk every day on my treadmill at least 20 minutes, maybe sometimes 25. I'm also out walking through my neighborhood periodically with my kids or my husband or my dogs. I just love moving, but nobody ever gets hurt walking. I'm not jumping, I'm not running, I'm not spinning. You have to be careful with Hashimoto's because I like to say, it's like walking on thin ice. So if you think that going to all of these classes of high intensity box jumps, plyometrics, spinning could be just burning you out, draw back and walk outside or get on the treadmill. And that's what I do. I have a sauna in my home. And so after I do my walking, I have a sauna, and my husband and I made that purchase a year ago because we had developed the practice of using the sauna at our local gyms, and it started infrequently, then it became very frequent, and I was getting up to go use that before my clients came. So we decided it was worth the investment to have it in our home for function, the ease and cutting out the travel. I honestly have developed a practice where I use that every day. It's about 160 degrees in the sauna. I'm not just hot, I get a deep sweat. And I didn't start there, but I've worked up to it. And that really makes me feel good. Here's what it's doing to benefit me. It is not for fat loss. It is pulling what I like to say pollutants out of my system that are coming in on air, food, and water. Even with my best intentions in my lifestyle, we're still going to get it. And so that is my way of just ridding my system of those xenoestrogens that shouldn't be in there. And I just am addicted to that deep sweat. It feels good. I have so much energy. Then I do a cold shower. And someday I'm going to have a gym setting where I can do a cold plunge. This current home doesn't have that, but in my dream home, we're going to have a little bit of land where I'll have my training area, and then I'll have my cold plunge and sauna area. So until then, I'm doing a cold shower, and that's called contrast therapy, and it feels awesome on my body. So I'm giving my system a lot of that impact from changing the heat shock therapy, and then getting that cold to activate the brown fat. So I know I just dumped a lot on people that I did not start here. Okay. So I've been 12 years in on this journey. I really didn't start all of these sauna work until about 2 years ago. So about, 10 years in. Do not think that you have to flip a switch and check all these boxes. This is me 12 years into the lifestyle. I'll then train clients, and then I weight train myself. So I do belong to a local gym, and I'll go there in the winter, but otherwise I have a gym in my third car garage of my home, and it's got anything and everything that I need. Dumbbells, kettlebells, barbells, and I train 5 days a week, 3 lower body days, 2 upper body days. I'm currently using a trainer named Brett Contreras, who writes my training plans for me. And then we train big compound movements. So I'm doing deadlifts, hip hinges, overhead presses, bent rows, big compound movements in usually sets of 3 to 4, and the rep range of about 6 to 15. So that said, I'm getting big, heavy impact on my system, which again, for Hashimoto's, the best thing a gal can do is weight train and consistently, and she can walk. But if you're using weight training that is interspersed with a lot of intervals, and you're doing overhead presses, and then you're going and spinning on a bike, and then you're doing overhead presses, and you're doing box jumps and such, you could be doing too much. Those HIIT, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of HIIT, and I've used it, but don't confuse true old-fashioned weight training with some of that circuit work that is not one and the same. And as a trainer, I just want to drive that home. And then, through the day, I missed one piece. On my treadmill, I have red light, and I got that at Mito red lights. And I have red light therapy that I'll do every morning while I'm walking. So I'm kind of multitasking there. So again, heat therapies, daily movement, good sleep, the red light therapy, and then nutritional therapy through the day. I'm using MyFitnessPal to track my foods. I track macros. I currently am running my own nutrition, so I'm not using an outside coach for that right now, but I coach that as well, so I know how to do it. And, I typically don't have the metabolism where you'll hear people say, oh, you should be able to reverse diet and go and just eat endless amounts of food. And the more you can eat, the better off your metabolism is. I have found that as someone with a thyroid disease, my metabolism tends to be slower and I don't need a ton of food. I will typically gain, and I'm just going to say the number, but I don't want you to think it applies to you. I will gain on about over 1,700 calories. And I know that for my body. So I typically, at 5'6", 47 years old, I'm eating about 1,500 a day, and that's not in fat loss mode. Okay. So, but again, that is not a general application. That's a person specific, but that is real foods, whole foods, one ingredient items. So it's not filled with pastries and packaged goods that are going to take up a lot of that space. It's filled with plants and the chicken and eggs and beef and just plainer items. And then I might season it with mustards or pink Himalayan salt. And then, you know, running kids around, training clients, working online with clients, navigating my food all through the day. Do factor in going out to eat with my family and friends. And I do steer clear of alcohol. So, you know, steering clear of the grains, the alcohol. I won't do fried foods. And those type of boundaries that you set on yourself, you actually open your door to a lot of real foods, nourishing items that you don't tend to be super hungry anymore because you're truly getting fed from a micronutrient level. Repeat that system over time, but the key factor is I do sleep on a rhythm. So I try to get outside, like you said, in the sunlight through the day. Winters are very hard on me because we're stuck inside, which is why I've got the red light. But, you know, try to get as much sun on my body and in my eyes, which that will help me sleep at night. So I do try not to eat late at night. I do better with a time restricted feeding. So fasting is all the rage right now, but I do better with a time restricted feeding pretty much through, I like to eat anywhere from like 8 a.m. until about 7 p.m. So as long as I've got I'm not dogmatic about it, but I try to have 12 non-eating hours and 12 eating hours at least. But if I can go like a 14, 14-10, you know, but I don't do long fasts. Anything over 18, super hard on my body, and it's not worth it. So anywhere in that 12 to 16 window is really ideal. But then I sleep on that rhythm. You know, I'm in bed every night by 10 because that's where I'm using my Aura ring to track my sleep and my heart rate variability and my readiness and my deep sleep and my steps, and that all of what I just said factors in. And that system that I described helps me stay ahead of the symptoms. So a lot of it's rooted in nutritional for sure. That's kind of the foundations. But I am one of those people that, you know, 4th of July, for example, fireworks. My husband and my body's on such a rhythm. I probably don't even need an alarm clock to get me up at 4. I'll just naturally wake up. My cortisol will start to rise. But I also feel it at night. I start to calm down to where I'm like, it's time for bed. I'm done. Mm-hmm. And my kids will say, Mommy's hit a wall, because I'll commonly say, I hit a wall. And that means I need to go to bed. And with Hashimoto's, and really with anyone, you can get that second wind at 10 p.m., but it is a false second wind. And in the time I used to stay up late and push it and stay up when everyone else was in bed and it was quiet and I enjoyed those alone hours, I was really setting myself back. And now I know that I got to get to bed. I want to sidestep and say you need to read the book Sleep Smarter by Sean Stevenson. He taught me the importance of getting to bed by 10, and you get those deep sleep hours between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And once you start doing that consistently on a rhythm, you'll get territorial. And like I said, even on the 4th of July, you'll say, I'm going home early because I need to get to bed and I can't stay up late.
Yep. Well, I just want to pause. I want to pause you right there because I have an Aura ring as well, since January, and it's been really helpful, honestly, when it comes to sort of biohacking my sleep. I'm sort of a self-proclaimed night owl. So from the time I was in, I mean, probably even middle school, high school, I've always really liked to be up late at night. And regardless of when I go to bed, I'm not very good early in the morning. But having said that, though, I've noticed that since using my Oura Ring, if I can get in bed before 10 or around 10:30, my deep sleep and my REM almost double for the night. And of course, that's happening because it's happening before midnight. However, sometimes that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I work late. Sometimes I don't go to bed until midnight. Like last night, I think I went to bed at like 12:07 was what time I fell asleep, which was way too late. And my sleep score was affected, right? Like my readiness was affected. Everything was affected on there. Before we go any further, and I love that you shared all the detail about your daily routine. I think that's all so valuable. And I love how it's a holistic approach. Like you're not just addressing nutrition or exercise, you're also addressing the sleep and making those things a priority. And it goes to say too, that like, a mom of multiple children and someone who's busy and training clients and has a busy lifestyle can still prioritize their health. Right. And it's, like I said before, it's a step-by-step process. But the one thing I wanted to ask you just on a personal level is, how do you use your Oura Ring scores when it comes to your heart rate variability and your readiness? How are you using those scores each day, so to speak, to navigate your training?
So, because I do coach clients, I keep track of all of their data, and I basically made myself a client. So I have a spot in my spreadsheet, and I do track that on a weekly basis. I track my step count, those variables. I just like to see from week to week how I'm trending. And I will, historically, my deep sleep has gone up, and my readiness has improved. But lo and behold, when I check my readiness every morning, if I'm starting to get sick, it starts to drop. If I had some dairy over the weekend, and it really, I ordered something and I think it was a lot more than I thought it was, and it really set me back nutritionally, and then my system started to downward spiral. So that is the compound effect of Hashimoto's. Your health can start to come out, down from like a meal or a dessert weeks back, and you don't even know it, but I knew it. And so I watched my readiness go down this week, and I know better that if it's pretty low, then I shouldn't train. And that's hard on me because like I said, I'm very systematic, and the plan says I train. So it's actually harder for someone like me to pull back and say no and press pause. But I've also learned, if you do, Mindy, take a break today, you're probably going to improve and make the best out of the next coming days. Otherwise,
Yes.
you're just going to prolong this.
Yes.
And so I've gotten more okay with, I definitely believe in rest days, but I've gotten more okay with like taking an unplanned rest day if the numbers tell me, or
Yes.
I notice that sugar cravings are up or stress is high. I just try to be a little more patient with myself. So
Yeah.
I use it, and it all works together for sure. That
Absolutely. Yeah. I tell women all the time, like between my tracking my cycle and knowing what phases I'm in and what my energy levels are, combining that with the Oura Ring has been game changing, because, I'm the same way as you. I like to have a set plan. I know I'm going to do legs on this day. I'm going to do cardio on this day, whatever. And I got to the point in 2020 where I customized that plan. Instead of just being the same thing 6 days a week, all the time, I changed it to match my luteal phase or my follicular phases. I started to cycle sync. But when I started using the Oura Ring, I started to notice, like, okay, I would wake up in the morning and I would say to myself, like, okay, today I'm in my luteal phase. So today I'm going to do a little bit of HIIT and I'm going to train a little bit of legs. And then I look down at my Oura Ring and it's like, your readiness is low. You should rest today. And you're like, well, crap. Like, now what? Like I thought I was doing the right thing because I'm cycle syncing. And then you look down and you think, no, I need to listen to this. It's paying attention to my heart rate. It's paying attention to my rest. It's paying attention to everything. And I have noticed the same thing, that there have been times where I push through anyway, and I pay for it. Like the next day I wake up and it still says your readiness is low. And I'm like, dang it, and then there are times where I do listen to it and I say, okay, I'm better off to just do a little yoga or just walk a few minutes and just rest. And when I do, I come back stronger the next day. And I know that leg session is going to be so much better than it would have been had I not rested. So I'm glad I asked that question. Now we are running short on time. So I want to make sure, we didn't even touch on like food sensitivities and all that kind of stuff, which we could have. I'll make sure to link everything up in the show notes as it pertains to some resources that I've used to learn more about Hashimoto's. There are two. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So a little note that I want to really drive home. In 2015, I remember learning about the impact of, our toiletries and our cosmetics and our lotions and all the things, right? And I had a cabinet full of beautiful lotions and scents out the wazoo and very expensive perfumes my husband had just bought me. And I knew in my heart that was setting me back, because what gets on us gets in us, especially with Hashimoto's. I literally remember putting it all in the trash. I, deleted the deodorants, changed the soaps, changed the toothpaste, changed the shampoos. And I really feel that was a turning point, the compound effect over time. So if you're struggling and you've been saying, I've been doing all of this, or I've been doing some component of this, that could be the missing link, because that's not something you necessarily see in a person, to know that, I try and I don't wear lotions. I don't typically put a lot of things on my skin. If I'm around the home, I don't even put makeup on, because I'm very protectant against, minimal spray tanning, only for my shows or when I'm presenting trophies at a show. Those things add up, and that could be the little piece, that drip in the bucket that's really setting a system off. So I can say from a Hashimoto's, someone living with it, to really help you understand how important that is.
Yes. And that was actually one of my final two questions. So you just nailed it. Same for me. I've said on this podcast that when I started using bioidentical progesterone cream in my 20s, I had neck surgeries and I had done Botox, and I was sort of like a guinea pig for modern medicine, putting anything into and onto my body to try to get rid of the pain from my migraines. And when my doctor took me off of everything pharmaceutical, and she put me on this little yam root cream that was maybe like a dime size amount, and I started putting it on my wrist, and it took care of everything. It took care of the brain fog. I slept better. It took care of the headaches. When I saw the power of this little drop of natural cream on my skin, I started to think, well, crap, like what about those conventional lotions I'm putting all over my body, and the shampoo that's in my hair, and the cleaning products that I still smell when my cleaning crew leaves the house? Like, what about all these things that are sort of in the air around me? And that was exactly where I was going to go with the conversation, was to really make sure people understand that a lot of times people say to me, well, I don't think I have a lot of stress, right? Or I do eat well, and this doesn't make sense. And I tell them there's this whole other component of environmental factors, things that are in our day-to-day. Are you drinking from plastic bottles? Like what are you around and consuming? And even at work, in your work environment. I remember when I was working my corporate job, apparently my corporate employer was really into like Glade plugins. There were Glade plugins like all over the building, and now knowing what I know, I'm like, like I feel like I was sitting in like a poison trap, but it's so true. And I think, you alluded to it when you were talking about your earthing practices, and I've talked about it on the show, that getting outside in nature and getting that fresh air, but also taking a look at, okay, when I'm in my home and when I'm in the places that I control the environment, what can I do to change over, right? Like when you said perfumes, right? Like what are the things that I'm holding on to that I need to let go of? That could be sort of, you said earlier, like you have a sort of a light filter with Hashimoto's, like these things are things that you're absorbing in your body. So that goes for everyone, regardless of whether it's Hashimoto's or not. Even for myself, like I said, when I started to see the impact of something beneficial to my system absorbing through my skin, I started to think about what are the other things that I'm putting on my skin that's causing problem. So that leads me to sort of my last question for you today, which is, and I realize this is unique to you, and I want to call attention to the fact that this is just unique to you, but I would love to hear, what is your protocol as far as supplementation? And I don't just mean like any form of like pill supplementation or capsule or whatever. I'm also referring to nutritional as well. So for example, I know that with thyroid, selenium tends to be a thing. And I know that I advocate that the women in my course are consuming different types of nuts and things to really make sure that they're getting some selenium. So I want to make sure like that we touch on that, because I think there are some things that people out there with Hashimoto's can be doing from a supplementation perspective. So could you touch on that for me?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think if you're listening and you've made it this far, and maybe you're someone with a thyroid disease or Hashimoto's, your head is spinning and you think, where do I start? And it's pretty overwhelming. I think it's natural to think that you're just missing something and there's more that you need to go buy. And a lot of times it's rooted in just getting started and taking baselines of everything you do. You know, what is it you're eating? What is it you're drinking? What are you doing with your time? Who gets your attention? All through your day. Just start putting it down on paper. Don't try to change anything, put it down on paper. But naturally we think, okay, this is the part where Mindy comes in and tells you what you need to go buy, because then that's going to be the magic thing that I haven't tried yet. And I do take some supplements on a daily basis, but honestly, I wouldn't really attribute any of that to helping necessarily the Hashimoto's. I do amino acids for weight training, but it's more what I don't do. Okay. And I want to re-say that, because I think a lot of times we just are in a society of thinking we need to do more, buy more, or we're always looking in that back corner of the plan that we've missed it. And that's what the fitness center tells you, is you just haven't found it yet. And this is the new thing. Okay. And so this thing we've all been missing. I'm going to tell you, you haven't missed it. It's just that it's what you don't do. And there are many things, like I've mentioned here in this podcast, that if you stop doing, you can, maybe if you're on a budget, you don't even have to go invest in anything more. You'll get that progress. I do a multivitamin. I do, some natural testosterone support. I'm just kind of pulling it off the top of my head. I don't do a protein shake. So some people are doing protein shakes because of the dairy factor. I don't do a protein shake, and then I'm not an advocate of plant proteins because it's an incomplete protein. So I don't do a daily protein shake, which we consider a supplement. My family does something called Kion's protein shake, Kion, and that if I do recommend it to a client, that's who I would. It's Ben Greenfield's product, and it's got like 5 ingredients, and it's like the Cadillac of protein shakes. It's a whey-based whey isolate. So, but I won't do that. Just do, like I said, those 1 ingredient whole foods. And I try not to become reliant on too many outside items that I need. It's more rooted in that pattern and that lifestyle, and getting back to what I call ancestral ways. I like to think that if I were to sit down and talk to my grandmother and great grandmother, they can pronounce half of the things that we see, the internet, all of that. I just like to think, how would they be living? And sometimes with Hashimoto's, less is more. So if you're listening to this and you're to the point of feeling overwhelmed to where you're like, I don't even know where to start, less is more.
Yep.
And just try to just get unbusy, and you can have a great impact on your symptoms by getting unbusy. There was I could talk all day on this.
Oh, you're fine. I just wanted to chime in. And say that, I love, you said this on our last interview as well. And I love that it's the consistency of your answer is not to rely on, rely on your own nutrition, rely on your own lifestyle. I love that you just said that about protein shakes. I have that conversation daily where somebody asks me about a protein shake and I'm like, why are we so concerned about a protein shake? Are you getting enough vitamins and nutrients and micronutrients? Are you getting enough fruits and vegetables? Oh no, you're getting about 2 servings a day. Well, let's focus on that instead of the protein shake. So I love that you just said that, because I think you're right. Like a lot of times myself included, especially back when I was dealing with a chronic health issue, I wanted somebody to give me a fix. Like I wanted somebody to give me like something to take or something to drink or a pill to consume or whatever, because I wanted to get rid of it. And at the end of the day, right, like there are so many other things we can do to get to the root of it. Like if someone, even if a doctor gives you a supplement, even if it's a natural supplement, okay, great. But if you're consuming inflammatory foods that are inflammatory to you, that supplement is not really going to touch the surface of what's going on. You've got to get down to the root. So I think we've touched on so many amazing things today. As always, I love having you on here. I feel like we could talk forever. I made lots of notes and I will link everything up in the show notes for everyone. But I think Mindy is an example of someone who obviously her thyroid has been impacted and it's something that she's living through. Like we said earlier, there's no after photo. It's something that you live with. It's just a matter of how well you live with it, right? It's a matter of how you manage it and can you really approach it from a lifestyle perspective. And as you've heard through her daily regimen and her focus on fitness and nutrition and healthy, mental health, like we haven't even touched the surface on any of that stuff. Like, you're clearly living this lifestyle of managing it well. And so I know there's going to be a woman listening to this who is going to say, wow, like I really don't have the excuses that I had before. I really need to really get to the root cause of what's making me feel bad and start to realize that I'm in control of my own health and that I can do some things to help head me in the right direction. So Mindy, any closing thoughts as we wrap it up?
Well, yes, I just want to give anyone listening hope. And I always tell people that if I come across, I'm in several thyroid groups and I really don't get in there much, but if it happens to pop up, I often like to say, I just have hope. Have hope for healing, have hope for empowerment, that you can be in control of how you use your time, what you put on your fork, who you're around. You're not a victim of this. You can and are a victor. And it's just amazing to me how strong we can get mentally and physically when we start telling ourselves that mantra. And another factor, if you decide to start cutting a lot of these things out of your life, you will go against common flow. You will not be flowing with the general population because people are eating a fast food, fast-paced microwave diet. And what I'm saying is to get well, live well, and stay well, is you have to abandon a lot of this fast pace. Go back to ancestral ways, be okay with going against the flow. And that's where your health and healing is rooted. But be confident and know that you're not alone. It might feel like you're alone, but once you get to that place of what I like to say, getting your health back or getting yourself back, then what everyone else around you is doing won't really matter, because you have now found a system and patterns and mindsets that allows you to live out your best self. And that's all you need. You don't need approval or to please anyone else. And once you tap into that, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks of you. I didn't say it was going to be easy, and it's going to be the road less traveled for sure, but it is possible. And if you're willing to do anything to get your health back and feel, look, and perform your best, this is what it takes.
Amen, sister. I think that's a mic drop. And I think, we'll have 2 episodes, right? We'll have like an hour-long version of all the detail, and then we'll just take what you just said in a nutshell, and that'll be an amazing, if no one listens to anything else, that's enough. That's amazing. So thank you so much for being on here today. I always love chatting with you. I know last time you shared, you have a Facebook group and all your information. I'll make sure to link all that up in the show notes. So if people want to find you on social media, or if they want to find your website, we'll link all of that up. But thank you so much, my friend, for being here. I'm sure it won't be the last time. We'll talk soon.
Ask me anytime.
All right, cool.